Hi, this is Jenny from the Sewing Palace. Thank you for joining me. We are on month 2 of our Christmas Saturday Sampler class. The pattern is by Thimble Creek Quilts, and it's this cute little pattern called Santa's Village. So we're on month 2, and I'm going to show you how to make your block. All right, let's look at our block for month 2. This is a 12-inch block, so from here to here should measure 12.5 inches before you put it into your quilt. The finished size is 12 inches. And if we break this down into a grid, there is 1, 2, 3, 4. That means the units are 3.5 inches unfinished or 3 inches finished. This is a square with a little square sewn onto the corner to make a cute little triangle or a connector. This is just a plain old square, and then this is a half square. And so if you keep looking at your block, this is the same as that. This is a plain square, another half square triangle just with a different color, another half square, plain, and so on. So these are repeats, a couple naked blocks, and then quite a few half square triangles, and you will get started. All right, let's talk about some tools for successful quilting. First, I'll talk about a couple of machine tools. I'm sewing on a Bernina 570 with a dual feed feature, but if you have a great quality stitch on your machine, that's what you need. And you'll want to select a straight stitch plate or purchase one if you need one. This is the regular stitch plate that comes with your sewing machine, and that allows for a zigzag stitch. So there's a big oval opening where your needle goes. And if you have a straight stitch plate, that location is right here, and that's just a single hole. So that provides better support for your fabric and will give you a better stitch and more accuracy. The other thing for your machine would be a 1/4 inch presser foot, and this is a 37D for Bernina machines. It's a 1/4 of an inch on either side, and then it also has the feature of being able to use dual feed. There's quite a few choices there. You can ask us here at the store, and we'd be happy to help you find out the right foot for your machine. I also have a rotary cutter, and then I have a high quality quilting thread which is called Aurifil. It's a 50 weight neutral colored thread that will kind of blend in with my fabrics. And speaking of fabrics, you'll need 3 different fabrics to pick your block. I have a light, and then I have green and red, and we'll talk about those locations here shortly, where they live. A pair of scissors, a friction pen, and some rulers to cut your fabric. Underneath I have a pressing mat, and underneath that a cutting board. And I have a specialty ruler here, which is a Bloc Loc ruler, and this one is a half square triangle, and it trims down to 3.5 inches because that's the size of our block. So that's a great ruler to use for this. And lastly, a starch additive, which we like to mix 1/3 of amount of Teriol Magic, 2/3 of Best Press, and put it in this atomizing spray, and it'll create a great mist for starching your fabrics. All right, here we are with our block 2 block, and you can see it's in 3 different colors. Some of the squares have a background or a light fabric, and then there is an A fabric, which is this darker shade of fabric, and then there is a B fabric, which makes 2 pieces of the pinwheel and then these little corners. So you have some choices there. If you're participating with us and getting a kit, we're going to compare 2 different blocks and decide how you want to lay it out. All right, let's look at the difference between these 2 blocks. This one in the traditional colorway has a light background and then more green half square triangles, which are these dark green, and then only 2 red half square triangles, but they also make up these little corners here. And then this brighter colored block is just different. There's more red half square triangles here and only 2 green there, and that makes up the corners. So you choose where you want your dominant color, if you want it red or green. If you're doing the kit with us, you will have more red in the block. All right, let's look at the directions. I'm on page 3 of the Santa's Village pattern, and there are 3 fabrics, fabric A, B, and background. So fabric A is going to be the red, and it says to cut 3 3 7/8 inch squares, and I'm going to have you cut it just a little bit larger and trim it down with Bloc Loc. So we're going to cut 3 4 1/4 inch squares of the red, and then down below that, out of fabric B, it says to cut 1 3 7/8. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to cut 1 4 1/4 out of the green, And then we're going to follow the directions for fabric B, or the green, which says 4 2-inch squares. Those are the little triangles in the corner. And then under background fabric, you need 8 3.5, and that makes up your solid squares, or the ones with the little corners. And then at the very bottom of the directions, it says 4 3 7/8. We're going to do 4 4 1/4 of that and use the block lock method. So I have a kit laid out here. This is my green. I'm going to cut 1 4 1/4 and then 4 2 inches out of that. I have 2 pieces of background, a slender one and a large one. We're going to put the light background right sides together with the red, and out of this you're going to cut the 4 1/4. You'll cut 3 of them, and then with the leftovers you're going to cut some other stuff out of the background. But if you starch these, lay them right sides together and cut your 3 4 1/4 out of each, then they'll be ready to sew. And then out of this larger piece of background, you're going to be cutting the larger squares that are 3.5 solid background squares. So that should have it covered. All right, so we're ready to make a half square triangle unit. I have a light background fabric and a red fabric. They're cut 4 1/4. I pre-starched them. They're laying right sides together, and I'm going to mark diagonally from point to point. So I'm using the 45-degree line on the ruler, and I'm lining it up along the edge, and it should intersect those 2 points. If it doesn't intersect those 2 points when you've lined that up, that means you don't have a perfect square. You might not have cut it exactly 4 1/4 by 4 1/4. Maybe you cut it 4 1/4 by 4.5. So that's a good check to make sure you've cut a perfect square. Once you've marked the line, you're going to go to your sewing machine and sew on each side of the line. I'm going to sew on each side of the line with a 1/4 of an inch seam. I have a 1/4 of an inch presser foot, so I'm going to get going and sew. All right, we're ready to cut this apart. We've sewn a 1/4 inch on each side of the line. Line up my rotary cutter and ruler along that line, and now I have 2 pieces. I'll then take it to my pressing mat. On this I have a dark fabric which is red. Set the seam and then flip it over and press that seam open. And when you iron, you want to keep sure you're not going back and forth, just holding it nice and steady. And then you'll do the same to the other one, and voila, I have 2. I'm going to show you how to trim them down next. I'm ready to trim them down. Take this and I'll turn it so that the seam is now facing me, and when I can read the ruler, I'll lock that into the seam, and it will lock in so that that diagonal is right to the point. This is a Bloc Loc half square triangle ruler that measures 3.5 inches. So that's the finished size of my unit. At this point I can just trim all of the sides around this, and I will have a perfect half square triangle unit. And you'll keep doing that with your red and your green until you have enough to start making your block. Ta-da! All right, now we're going to make the other unit in the block, which is a solid square with a little triangle on the corner. I have a 3.5 inch background square and a 2 inch square of green. I will lay that in one corner. That is not important which corner it is. And then again, you're going to mark diagonally from point to point. And if you use this 45-degree line and make sure that it's down that and intersects 2 points, you know that you have a perfect square. Now on this unit, you will be sewing right on that line, not on the side of it, but right on the line. So let's get ready to do that. So we're going to sew right on the point, and off we go. You've sewn that right on the line, and then you'll flip this over and press that towards the corner, and you should have a flippy triangle unit. I'm going to show you how to make a couple adjustments with that if you need. We've sewn on that, and I just want to show you what may happen when you sew it. If you haven't sewn on the line exactly, or your fabric slipped, you'll see that this green is a little bit longer than the cream. And so this should have been 3.5. When you're all finished, it should be 3.5 with the green on top. So with this unit, I could trim off that little excess and make sure that it is incorporated into the block and it's still 3.5. So there's my excess. Or if on the other side, when I flipped it over and I was a little short with this fabric, I would cut this extra piece of green out in the middle remove that bulk, and then when I've laid this flat, I will use my cream fabric as the guide, and that helps correct my block as I go. So we're ready to lay out our block. This is a prop it. It has a sticky surface of fabric on the front, and on the back it has a little easel that you can pop out. So you can lay out your block and make sure that you have all your units laying properly. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to get my little pinwheel in the center laid out, and then we'll talk about how we're going to sew this block together. So what's nice about this is if you've got something twisted incorrectly, you can see it right away and make the correction before you start sewing it. Get ready to sew our block. I'm going to sew these units together, this to this, this to this, this to this. Then I'm going to go over here, this to this, and so on. So when I get ready with my prop it, I'll fold those over, and you can put a pin or a wonder clip in the correct side so that you know that's the side that you need to be sewing. When you walk to the bed of your sewing machine, you make sure you're sewing the right side. So I've got a pin in that one. I'm ready to go. The other thing in efficiency, I stack them all up. I'm going to go to my machine. I'm going to sew 1/4 of an inch for each of those units. We've sewn the row right here, and now we're going to get ready to decide which way to press them. So with quilting, the general rule is to press towards the dark fabric, or sometimes you're going to break that rule. So when I'm looking at sewing this row together, I want to alternate the seam direction. So on this one, I decided to press it this direction, this one this direction, this one this direction, and this one this direction. So then when I sew these two units together, the seam bulk will be evened out between the two when I sew this seam. So my next plan of attack is to sew here and here and here, and I could make a row. I could also do here, and then I have a block of 4 and a block of 4, and then sew those together. So you just want to decide, do I want to sew it in rows or block at a time? So I think that's what I'll do, is I'll sew this is a block of 4, this is a block of 4, this is a block of 4, and there, and then we'll sew those blocks together. We're ready to sew. I'm using 1/4 of an inch seam with my blocks, and as I come up to this unit right here, there's a point where the threads cross, and that's called X marks the spot. And so your stitching should line up with that if you've had 1/4 of an inch seam. Shouldn't be over it, should just line right through that X, and you'll sew right across that. And then when that comes out, what you'll yield is you'll have a nice point if you've done that with your 1/4 of an inch. I have my blocks of 4 sewn together, so now I need to decide on pressing my seams or which way the seams are going to go. So I chose to have the seam go in the direction of this red color towards the dark, vice versa here. This one, here's that unit right here, and I'm going to press that seam towards the dark and this seam. So when I'm doing that, I'm going to press this seam in this direction. Here's that piece. I first press it flat, get it warm, and then I finger press it open and get that nice and flat. And I really think you can get them flatter with a woolly mat and get that unit nice and flat to sew into your block. So there's that unit, and he lives right here. We're going to sew these 2 units together and those 2 units together, and then we'll have one long seam, and I'll show you the pressing on that. We have our block all sewn together, and this is my last seam that I would press. You can press that seam open, you can splay out the center if you'd like, but I usually choose to press it open, and if you're on a woolly mat, it's going to press out beautifully. So there you go, you have your block done. This is Jenny from the Sewing Palace. Thank you for joining me for Block 2 of Saturday Sampler, Christmas Santa's Village. We're in Helena, Montana. Stop by the store. Bye-bye.